Hello. So we are back with the second episode of the podcast for the PBC League. I'm here today with a guest co-host, as Robert is unfortunately unable to join us. I'm Jonathan, and with me I have.
Hello, this is Joseph. I am the
uh,
co-commissioner of PBC and the GM of the Monterey Sultanes.
Indeed. So today we're going to be looking, I think we're going to probably split this into two parts. We're going to have the first part, we're going to look through the AL, look at the American League, the different success stories, the less so successful stories, and giving sort of an overview of how the season went, and with maybe a little bit of look towards the future, but mostly how the season went and the state of the teams. Um, we may not mention about some of the off-season trades that have happened since, or acquisitions that have happened since, as this is very much more looking at 2043 rather than 2044. So with that out of the way, I think we should be ready to get going with the Yankees.
Absolutely.
Now the Yankees, World Series world champions. Very good season. I don't think you can get much better. Um, and I think the big thing to note here, obviously, is the end of a 24-year drought. Joseph, you've been in the league longer than me. How have they been in the league? Do you think this was coming, or has this come a bit out of the blue?
I believe this was coming, but it was a little hard to see it after their disappointing 2042 season.
Mm-hmm.
They led the league in all these pitching categories, but they are relatively dead last in just about every offensive category.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's to note with this team is they did make some big moves in the off season.
Yes, they did.
I think the big move being Hugh Janus coming from Mexico City, the former creator prospect, with some interesting lore, which I think we did mention on the last podcast, if you want to check that out, the last episode. And he made a big contribution.
Yes, he did. He ended up getting injured and not playing in the World Series, but he had an 838 OPS in his 44 games with them.
Indeed. And I think he provided a much needed offensive boost. I think you could see in a couple of the World Series games it was tight, and they definitely could have used him there if the Phillies had put up maybe a bit more of a challenge. So I think a good acquisition overall.
Yes, and they ended up only getting rid of an international complex player by the name of
Rogelio Sotelo,
Rogelio Cedillo. Yep.
yeah, and I think considering the way he's panned out this season, I think it's certainly going to be looked back at as a favourable trade for the Yankees.
Oh, definitely.
The other big
I
trade, sorry.
I was going to say that this next trade is probably the bigger one for them.
That trade was.
That's the Jeff Dreyer and Dan Fox trade.
Yes. Yeah, and that was a mid-season trade, wasn't it?
Yes, right at the trade deadline, along with
Right at
Janus.
the trade deadline. Right with Janus. And they picked up, I think you could say, a very capable second baseman. I
Definitely
think he's
on.
going to be a big part of the Yankees going forward. He's a young guy, cost controlled, which is big. And while he's at second base, he does have that innate ability to play shortstop if needed. So maybe a flexible piece of the roster as well.
Yes, he definitely has the arm to play short.
Yes.
Yes, and he'll be under team control for the next 5 seasons.
Indeed. And I think even Horacio would admit he didn't expect him to play that well.
Yeah, he had a very impressive rookie campaign.
Indeed. Now, other acquisitions that were made during the year, we're looking at Nate Daniels, the backup catcher from Seattle. Didn't appear at all in the playoffs, as far as I'm aware, but provided a slight boost to get them, right up to the top of their division, and that first seed, it made a big difference for them.
He was
They got
definitely
the
Daniels was definitely one of the better backup catchers that they relied on during the season to back up
indeed,
Apodaca.
indeed, and starting to look a bit more at that lineup that season. We spoke about it a bit on the last episode, but the team's elite performer here was really Jeff Rudd. You're looking at a elite first baseman with excellent contact, still got that pop, and basically never strikes out. So he's going to hit for high averages, and he just had a great season.
Yes, he has. This is the 7th or 8th season in a row where he's had 200 hits or more.
That's very impressive. And he brings a leadership presence to that team, a good veteran. And I think with no real sign of regression, that contract leading through until 2045 is looking in good shape.
Yes, it is. And interestingly enough, he's never won an MVP.
No, that is an interesting fact. He's also only ever won two silver sluggers back in the late 30s. Although a lot of all stars, including one for this year. And I think if you look at the rest of the lineup, it was generally good performances, but nothing spectacular. Bernal, a good performer. Eugenus again, a good performer. But they had quite a lot of guys who were under that 100 WRC plus line. Nichols, Ward, Blackstock, Goddard. None of them you would say are spectacular offensively. And so it was the defense that made a difference, wasn't it?
Yes, they ranked as the #1 defense in baseball last season.
And Hall, a big part of that. Esper Hall, not Esper Hall, Josh Hall, with a 2.81 ERA, lefty arm, coming out in as the ace of that rotation, and Benegas being a solid performer as well. And in fact, none of that rotation had an ERA over 4, which was incredibly impressive.
Yes, they ranked first in just about every category the pitchers could. And
Yep.
what is even more impressive is their bullpen ERAs was 3.
Yeah, you've got Josh Christie, who was used more as a stopper this year. 1.50 ERA. Juan Cerna, 2.09 ERA. And looking further down, Josh Castillo, 1.83 ERA. It was a very impressive performance. And I think Horacio will be very happy with how his team turned out this year.
Oh, absolutely.
Doug Nichols, I think, deserves a mention for his World Series performance. Do you remember how many home runs he hit?
I believe he hit 6.
6 home runs. For a guy that had, let me find it, for a guy that had only hit 7 home runs in the entire regular season, this guy got hot at the perfect moment. And really a outstanding performance and the deserved World Series MVP.
Yes, it was really fun to watch him.
Yes. Looking at their farm, just for a quick moment, notable performance was Joe DeRosiers, who really, showed up out of nowhere to provide a nice pitching prospect for a team that is a little short on the prospect side of things. There's a couple of decent guys there, but no one that is really going to, really impress around the league.
That is true. A lot of these competitive teams are a little low on the prospects.
Indeed. And Grootveld is another guy that has been there for a little longer, scouting discovery in 36 from the Netherlands. And if he can get that change up to that 85 potential, he's going to be one to watch.
Yes, he has a high stuff potential, high movement, high control. He's going to be a serviceable pitcher in the near future. Probably a good 3 or 4.
Obviously, the concern being though that he is now getting towards 24. He's fragile, and he's still got some way to go. So we will have to see how that goes going forward.
Absolutely.
All right. Moving on to New Orleans, the Voodoo, we have another playoff appearance. It's never going to end. This is 15 in a row, and I think another strong season for them.
Oh, absolutely. And interestingly enough, their playoff run started when they were chosen to when they were in second place to the scandal Royals.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes, they are only 82 and 80 and 14 games back when they ended up winning their first when they went to their first playoff berth.
Wow, that is quite the story. And since then, I don't think they've really looked back. They had another very strong season, 99 wins, only one away from that 100 mark, and only really losing the division on the final day. Playoffs was an interesting experience. It looked a little bit questionable with the first series against Seattle. My Mariners taking game 1 against them, but they came back. And I think the highlight of their season has to be that 3-2 win against the Grizzlies.
Oh, absolutely.
I think the Grizzlies were considered by many a very strong team heading into playoffs, taking the AL East. And I'm not sure many would have had the Voodoo taking that from them.
Well, I don't think many people would have expected the Yankees to overtake the Voodoo because the Voodoo were in first place at the All-Star break.
This is true. They maybe faltered a little bit during the latter half. But I think considering that their rotation was relatively shallow, they will be quite happy with the season.
Oh, absolutely. They didn't have the best rotation, but they did rank 6th in the AL.
Yeah. Edwards, I think, was the standout.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Edwards was the standout.
do you want to talk a little bit more about him?
Uh, he he's been there about 2 years. This is his sixth. This was his 6th postseason appearance,
Yeah,
and he's
and
oh, I'm sorry,
no, go ahead.
and he's had a pretty okay career so far. He hasn't really dominated the league, but he was definitely the ace of the Voodoo this season.
Yes, he's a former Mariner. Um, Pitched very well for them in 41. Came to Voodoo, had a good year last year, but I think perhaps we might say that his pitching performances have never quite matched the potential that his FIP suggests he could
Oh, that's very
perform.
true.
Another good point in that rotation would be Tyree. did a good job eating innings and just giving the offense a chance. I think considering the overall of 50 that the OSA gives it,
Yes.
he didn't do an awful job.
No, he didn't. He didn't do an awful job. He had 2 WAR on the year, and that's about what you want from just about any player is the bare minimum.
Yeah. Moving on to the offense, I think the one guy we have to mention is Moyeda.
Who's that?
He had
LeMay?
Moyeda.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Moyeda, I think that's how you pronounce it. The third base, Ernesto Moyeda. He was in his final year with the Voodoo, moving on in the off season, most likely with going to free agency. He managed to get through the season uninjured despite being incredibly injury prone. I think OSA has been wrecked. And he posted a WAR of 5.6 with a 159 WRC plus, which rates, I think you would say, is one of the best third basemen in the league.
Yes, he also led the league in on base percentage.
Ah,
422.
Moneyball man. People will, I think, you'll be looking at the Oakland A's being interested. Although maybe not with their contract demand. I think he's at 30 million for the offseason. Now, Schmeiser had another good season. Lemage, Bowler, all very good seasons. Really carried that pitching staff to the playoffs and to 99 wins. Do you got any of those that you are particularly interested in?
Well, Lamage and Snyder, and don't forget Caterini.
Caterini too, yeah.
Yeah, I think their offense was really one of the highlights of this team.
Yeah, and I think considering the position he plays, Lemage, you can afford for him to have a slightly poor defense, because that sort of offensive production at a crucial position is invaluable to the team.
Yeah, which is he's been pretty good at shortstop throughout his career.
Yeah. Let me see, find his stats for the year. So yeah, this year he was looking at more of a sort of 0.7 ZR zone rating. So it's not bad by any means, and I think they'll definitely be happy with the defensive output he's performing at, although it's not quite what he has performed at with 6.4 in 2042 and 4.7 in 41.
Right, but at least it's not -18.
Of course. And he's on a very nice contract, 16 million a year. Where else are you going to find that sort of production with that sort of money?
I'm not sure if no, yeah, 16 million. I was thinking that some of that salary was being retained by San Francisco, but he was signed as a free agent.
Indeed. And no, he wasn't signed as a free agent. He was a trade. If I can find that trade, it was a long time ago. So they traded him to Voodoo along with 5.7 million in exchange for Cervantes, Veslage, Creason, and Gastelum. So some middling guys, Gastelum, Creason, and Cervantes, all decent performers, but nothing special. And Veslage is a starting pitching prospect for the Rangers. who we, I think, have yet to see really what he can do yet.
That is true.
The only concern, I think, with Lamage is that contract is running for quite a long time. We are looking at 2046 as his last year at age 37, and with an injury proneness of wrecked, there could be some concerns going forward.
That is true, but you could always plug him as a DH.
Of course, and with that power and eye, you're not going to be far off.
Right.
I think defensively, the big highlights were Caterini, Schneider as well. I mean, Caterini is an outstanding first baseman. I think he won the Gold Glove. Am I right?
Yes, he's won 12 Gold Gloves in his career,
And I think,
and the most recent is 2043.
yeah, I think you could probably put him on the mound, not on the mound, at first base at 40, and he would still be getting that Gold Glove.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
now the other performance, Snyder at second base. I think he had a good year in the field and contributed to, I think, on average, an average team defensively. But that offensive power put them through, and the pitching held its own to enough of a degree for them to make it to the October baseball.
Oh, absolutely. They were one of the big surprises of the season.
Indeed, I think
An
the
aging roster.
legendary, yeah, the legendary phrase from Patrick of "we are rebuilding" is no longer trusted by anyone across the league. Um, it seems to forebode another massive season. Um, but I think, yeah, if we look at the farm, it is an aging team. The farm has a lot of, should we say, serviceable players that are coming up, um, but not an awful lot when it comes to really great players. Cesena provides a a good young high ceiling talent, um, but it is at first base, and
He's a bit of
uh,
ways.
he is a long way away. So we'll have to see where that goes. Um, their number one prospect, according to the OSA, is Vittorio Nota, and he had a bad season in AAA, but a low FIP could suggest that there is more to come from him. Although that low movement will always be a concern.
They do have a couple prospects that could make a debut next season in Mike McKenzie and Jim Cook.
Yeah, yeah, both had good seasons in the minors, and I think we've all learned not to count the New Orleans Voodoo out, not to count them out going forward.
No, absolutely not. When they say they're rebuilding, it means they're making another run.
All right, so we'll move on to the Toronto Blue Jays. Yeah, so now moving on to the Blue Jays, we have a team that didn't make much of a push in the offseason in terms of trades. We're looking at maybe more a young team coming to the forefront, would you say?
I would absolutely say that they're a young team. I don't know how old they are. It looks like they aren't that young. Apparently, they're 28 overall, 21st in the league.
But I think you've got figures like Jim McKee is bringing that up a lot by being 35. Um, I think on the pitching side, Joe Pouncil brings that up a lot at 36, and a couple of their other bullpen guys. So I think the important guys here are young. Um, I think the most important guys we're looking at on this team were Gilliard and Davidson, and they're 23 and 24.
Yes, the core is very young. It's a nice core that Toronto has at the moment.
And I think it was a crushing end to the season for Toronto. Um, they had an outstanding run from late August into through quite a bit of September, and then it just fell apart in the final few weeks.
They were in the wild card for most of the season.
Indeed, you had big wins in series against the Voodoo, St. Louis, um, Mexico City, a win against Seattle, who they were competing against for the wild card, then a win against the Grizzlies, very unexpected, beating Kansas, beating Detroit, and then it all fell apart. The final week, uh, two losses to Montreal, a team that was not competing in the slightest, and then in the final series against Boston, a team that really did not put up much of a threat to most teams this year,
Yeah,
and
they
yet they
ended up
managed
getting
to move
shut
on.
out.
They got
Ended up getting
yeah,
shut out by 16 runs in one of the final games as well.
and that was the game where they were confirmed out of contention for the wild card. Um, real, really horrifying way for their fans to see them lose the season. Um, but yeah,
You
going
know,
back to
it's
those
been,
stars. Yeah, no, go ahead.
it's been a long time since they've been in the playoffs.
Yes, I think they certainly will be getting back to the playoffs. It's been too long. I think they last reached the playoffs actually in 2032, where they actually won the World Series. So that's
And I believe the GM, who was their GM at the time, is now the GM with the Dodgers.
I see. So bit of time, and obviously at the end of the season, some uncertainty with the GM going more absent. Letting the commissioners know that they were looking a new GM was going to be needed for the team, and I think they've left the team in excellent shape. Ian's going to have a fun time with this team, and
Yes, they have the most cap room of any team for free agency.
yeah, and I think that's going to make a big difference for them. Uh, just being able to add to that core of Gilliand and Davidson, who had excellent years, um, and both of them still under cost control. Uh, Lias was a excellent, showed some excellent promise as a major league centre fielder with his rookie season, and he'll look to build on that. Um, and is there anyone else in the offense you really want to look at?
I would say that Jimmy Hayes contributed a little. So did Jim McKee.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
both some of the veterans that were on the team.
yeah. And I think we've seen in a lot of these teams just how important some veteran presence can be. Um, moving on to the pitching side of their performance, you had, I think, three real core strong starters. You had Elizondo, Catala, and McSpadden, and all
Yes,
of them putting in good, solid seasons. Elizondo, I think, had the most innings in the league this year with
230
230.
innings.
That is a proper Chad innings eater. And yeah, Iron Man, 75 stamina to boot. That explains things. And how much war did he get? Let's have a look.
4.4.
4.4 war. So a
Yes.
good season from him. And I think that
Well,
overshadows McSpadden as well, but almost 200 innings from him. Um, so I think the big ask going forward will be, can they add maybe a 4 or 5 guy who can reliably give them innings, um, and make it so that they're not uh, having more questionable days 40% of the time.
yes. Catella and McSpadden, both their contracts are up at the end of 2044.
Indeed, and I think depending on how McSpadden performs this year, um, he still hasn't reached that potential of 60s. Maybe getting a bit old on that, but whether Toronto will offer him a new deal or not, who knows? He has high financial ambition, so I suspect that's going to be one that goes to free agency. And Catala has been good, but we'll have to see whether or not he is worth. I think it would likely be 12 million when he goes to free agency.
Yeah, it's probably in their best interest to move on from him.
No, actually, Catala has one more year.
Yes,
One more
2044,
year.
correct? Oh,
2040,
arbitration.
2045. He's got one more year after that because he's only got 4 years and 109 days of service time. So he's actually looking at another year, only at 7 million. And so they do actually have a bit more to keep together for that. Catella obviously being a lefty as well, which is important in the rotation. Defensively, I think you could say they were inconsistent. You've got
Yes.
defensive holes with Davidson and McKee. Obviously, Davidson, an excellent performer with the bat. I'm not quite sure where the defensive errors crept in there. Maybe it's that arm only at 50. But certainly a defensive season he'd like to forget. A zone rating of minus 8.8.
Yes, they also had two first basemen with negative WAR, combining for negative 10.1 WAR.
Ouch. And who were they?
Joey McEwen and Taeshik Cha.
Yeah, that's not going to be a fun time for them. You can't be making that
No,
many errors at first. You're just going to be getting runners on base, and eventually that will hurt you. McKee was minus 3.6 zone rating in the outfield, and at age 35, I don't think that's going to get any better.
no, and they also had Junsu Ha with negative 3.6 at third base.
Yeah, so one of the worst teams defensively.
They led the All American League with 90 errors, and they were 12th with a zone rating with negative 15.7.
Now looking towards their farm system, I think you could say it's fairly deep. They've got a lot of guys that are, at least intriguing. Looking into those green potentials, but I think the big concern they will have is Malcolm or Maclome. I don't know, Malcolm Ardman, who had a really nasty elbow injury. Elbow ligament reconstruction was needed, and it's left him quite raw heading into the next year. He is still only 19, but they will have to be, really hoping that it doesn't impact his development too much.
They do have a third baseman who is pretty decent defensively coming up. That could be up in the league next year. And they also have a right fielder who's decent
Is that
defensively.
third baseman
Jake
Kenan Wolf?
Kenan DeWolf and Jake Lee.
Right, yes. Some guys slightly lower down the prospect rankings, but getting closer towards making a major league appearance. So I think, in summary of the Blue Jays, the 11-year drought it's continued, but there's definitely signs that it's going to lift quite shortly.
Yes, I believe that if they just get the right pieces together, they could definitely compete for the AL East title.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add on about the Blue Jays?
No, I don't think so.
All right, let's move on. So, moving on to the Expos, a team that Joseph knows quite well. I think we're looking at another team that didn't make many trades in the off-season or at the deadline. and we're looking at a team that, should we say,
They made their
struggled? Yeah.
well, they just made their first postseason appearance in 2042,
Hmm.
and my dad, who's the GM, decided to go with that core going into 2043, and he does have some nice pieces coming up in his farm system, so it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think some fans might now be looking at 2042 as a bit of false hope, um, but obviously hoping for a bounce back season next year. I think for me the best word to describe their season was mediocre. They weren't horrible, but at the same time they weren't really that good. Uh,
No,
but I mean there were some bright spots. Andy Haight, um, top bat, great glove. I think almost any GM would snap at him to get it. Um,
and I would also say that Jonathan Watts, in a 1-year contract with the Expos, did really well as their DH.
mm, yes, and I think looking around at the pitching, I don't know if is there anyone else you want to mention on the hitting side?
On the hitting side, I would probably mention Nate Paulson, who's a two-way player. He pitches and hits for them.
Ah, interesting. So we've got a sort of mini Otani here, and was this his first full season or is this second season? Second season.
This is Paulson's second season.
Second season. And I think you could say he was serviceable on both fronts.
Yes, yes, he's definitely one of the team's highlights, and he batted more this season, and you can tell by his 24 home runs, 62 RBIs.
Indeed, and I think considering he's only making 2 million in arbitration this year and last year in 2044, I mean, and last year he was making uh, league minimum salary. You know, get that performance on both hitting and pitching, even if it's not great, it's going to be so economical for the team.
Oh, absolutely.
And obviously they also have Sean Doherty the third, who missed the 3 true outcomes. Um, I think the 3 true outcomes totaled out to a slightly above average season, um, but not much more than that.
Yeah, that's definitely he's definitely an interesting player.
Another creative prospect, obviously. Um,
Yes, former Brewers GM.
yes. Now, looking towards their pitching core, we've got, I think, mostly a bit of a dark spot for the team. Uh, we had mm, maybe three true starters,
Yes,
with Pacheco, Bruce, and Paulson. And outside of that, it was a lottery. Who
yes,
was going to pitch? And when they pitched, they often didn't pitch very well.
yes. They ended up not re-signing Zion Carthen, who went on to win 21 games with Cincinnati this year.
Yeah, that's got to hurt. I think that was probably a big reason that they had so much success in 2042.
Well, Kevin Bruce was injured the whole season last season.
Right. So a good return for him. Um,
Yes,
12 losses on the board, but I wouldn't say that accurately reflects the way he pitched.
no, no, he's one of the best, better young pitchers that they have. Him and Pacheco are carrying that staff.
Yes. Um, and I think to make it even worse, they had quite a poor defensive showing in the infield, uh,
Yes,
which is just an awful shame because when you have an infield that is just blundering everything, um, you're not, it's overshadowing the elite defensive outfield they've got there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, Zulu, Haight, and Benjamin are some of the finest defensive outfielders in the league. Especially Zulu. I think he's won 3 Gold Gloves. Yes, 3 Gold Gloves in his career, and Haight's won 2. And Benjamin, I don't think has won one yet. No, he won one in 2037.
Indeed,
Definitely elite outfielders.
indeed, and Zulu, you can see just how good of a defensive outfielder he was by the fact that despite only hitting for, I believe, 73
232.
WRC plus, yeah, he 2 WAR, and so much of that has got to be defensive.
16.8 zone rating.
Yeah, it's a crazy season. Now, I think there's hope for the Expos. Prospect wise, we're looking at a pretty good farm. I'd say
I believe that
I say they have 3 very good players coming up. You've got Basil Dua, Spear, and Darlin.
Yes.
Pascal Dua made a lot of progress this year. He's now the number 4 OSA ranked prospect at left field, and I think the OSA has him estimated coming in 2045,
Yes.
and there's definitely a future there.
And Van Dalen will probably be playing full time next season.
Mm.
He's going to take over at first base, and he's a better defensive first baseman than Myers is. And Myers is going to be going back to DH, where he had such great success in 2042.
Mm. And the concern in their prospects is Tim Spear. He did not play an awful lot, despite his high ranking in the OSA prospects. And when he did play, he was rather overmatched. So hopefully he can get his career back on track next year.
I believe he will be spending most of his time. He'll be going back to St. Albans in the JRR League.
But obviously a very, very strong prospect. Sorry about that. With extreme pull tendency, fly ball hitter, 70 home run power. If he delivers on that, he could be an elite player.
And the Expos do have one other bright spot I'd like to point out, and that's their closer, Tim Jasinski.
Tim Jasinski. Is that on the Major League roster?
Yes.
Cool. Talk a bit about him.
This is his second year in a row leading the league in saves. He had 50 saves this year. He had a bit of a. What was that?
Is that the best in the league?
That's the best in the league, 50 saves.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very impressive performance. And the fact that he's getting that many saves on a team that, let's be real, isn't winning many games. How many games did they win? I think it was 78?
77. 77, I believe.
So, and how many saves was that again?
50.
50. So,
Yeah, he saved
50 out of
about.
those 77. There were only 27 games that the Expos won last year that were not saved by him.
And he had only 4 blown saves all of last year.
That's very impressive. So not only was he, very good when it mattered, but he was reliable as well. And
Yes.
I
And
think
he also made his second All-Star game appearance last season.
and considering that those are all saves, that means there were a lot of tight games that the Expos won, and it could have been a whole lot worse without his performance.
Oh, absolutely. Having a good closer, having a good bullpen is something that a lot of teams in this league sorely lack.
Indeed. And I think the one last thing I have for the Expos is Flores. He's a long way off. He's a decent pitching prospect, but he's still very, very raw. 25 overall movement and 25 overall control right now with 35 stuff at age
But
20.
if he can meet that potential, he's got 4 excellent pitches there.
Indeed, indeed. And
And
he's not having to rely on trying to develop a changeup either. None of those pitches of those 4 are low that are expected to develop enormously. This is just expected to be decent normal development. But with the distance he is away from the major leagues, I think Montreal are definitely going to have to look at free agency as a way to fix their pitching problems.
absolutely, he's about 3-4 years away.
Indeed. All right. So, do you have anything else to add on the Expos?
I do want to say that my dad does a pretty good job of getting the best out of some of his players. He uses so many lineups during the season; it's incredible.
I think that's something we can all learn from.
Oh, absolutely. You're right.
Right. So, I think we'll move on to the next team. So now looking at the Tigers, they got a new GM this year.
Yes,
Andy's come over, and I think hopefully will provide a bit more of a direction for that team.
yes, they have been. They have been without a GM for quite a while as well, and they were once one of the powerhouses in the American League. They won 2 World Series in 2022 and 2035.
Mm. And they made some trades. I think it was at the deadline, wasn't it?
Yes, trades to help them in their rebuild. They were able to gain a couple draft picks and some prospects.
Yeah. So I think the big trade they made obviously was getting a first round pick, Bumfuss and Randy Love for Jorge Gonzalez,
Yes,
with Gonzalez being 100% retained. And how would you say that trade worked out?
I would say that Gonzalez actually proved to be a little bit of a disappointment for the Twins when they picked him up, because down the stretch, most of his stats ended up rising.
Mm.
But he does have 2 years left on his current contract, and it's being fully retained by Detroit, as you had said.
Mm.
And if he can rebound in 2044, then I believe that the Twins may have won this deal, because that first round pick is going to be, in the low 20s.
Indeed, yes. Minnesota Twins having a very strong season. So maybe not quite as valuable as Detroit would have hoped. Now the other big trade we had was Jeff Draher, which we've mentioned a little bit with the Yankees. How would you say that's worked out on the Detroit side of things?
Well, they did pick up a prospect, but he's 20 years old and he's pretty far away. He does look like he can be a relatively stellar utility man for the Tigers down the stretch. But I think the Yankees won that trade because you got a Dryer who adds some more offense to the Yankees that they desperately need, and he's under team control, as we were talking about earlier.
Maybe a case of a guy that it was correct to trade, but they could have got a better return.
I believe they probably could have got a better return.
Right. So now moving across to the way the team actually ended up looking in 2043, I think we've got another year in the wilderness, really. Unimpressive, but with some promising signs.
I agree. I agree. They have they have some things to look forward to. I mean, their team looks pretty old on paper right now,
Hmm.
but they have some prospects that they do have some prospects and some draft picks that they can look forward to.
Indeed. I mean, there is obviously the concern that Horn is getting older. He had another good season, was a big contributor to them. Um, and then on the other side of things, you had uh, Hippolyte, who had a very good season. Uh, but I think Hippolyte is on his way out.
Yes,
So I think he's been traded. We'll talk about that more on a later episode. Um, but at least he had a very good season, which has made you know, made his stock rise a little bit with other GMs.
oh, absolutely. Hippolyte was one of the most touted prospects in before he came into the majors.
Hmm.
I believe he was a first overall pick.
Oh wow, wow! And I think their international free agent signing from 2041 of Katsuhiko Yamaguchi has been a very reasonable performer. He's a good defensive catcher and has that pop in his bat. 101, 107 WRC plus isn't amazing, um, but 23 home runs, hitting for around 250. Uh, there's a lot to like with that.
I agree, and he has some,
4.4 also agrees.
and he's really good behind the plate as well. 1.1 zone rating, 1.6 framing.
Yeah, and I think he's still got some time to go on his contract. Another 3 years, I believe, including a player option. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not that option is taken up, or whether or not he gets traded, considering the strong performance this season. Now, moving on to the rotation, I think they struggled to impress me. I don't know about you, but when I looked at the rotation for last season, the their FIP was decent, but results-wise, their ERA was found lacking a little. Um, I think
They did have
Parkhurst was
one of
the
the
exception.
they did have one
Yeah,
of the highest ERAs in all of baseball, 4.67.
yeah. Um, and as I said, Parkhurst, a strong candidate in that rotation. One of their better players. Um, for those who have been paying attention, he has now been traded to the Iguanas. Another one we'll look at in another episode. But with that 80 potential, he is a big future candidate, um, and had a very good rookie season.
They had uh they had one starter, Josh Wall, who had over 7 ERA,
Yeah, you
and
cannot.
he had a he had a FIP of 7.45.
I'm not even sure that he would be able to survive in AAA, let alone Major League Baseball.
He 55 overall, 55 potential. It might be a question of did he get any run support?
Mm, that could
And it,
definitely be an issue. And
it
I think,
looks like run support was something that he lacked all last season.
and I think defensively they were mediocre. Um, Normally I'd dig into the defense of this team, but realistically there are bigger issues here. A lot of their guys in the field were role players. They're not guys who are going to be here long term, and I don't think it pays much to look too closely into that. So I think a better thing to do here would be to look at look at their farm system. Obviously, with Gonzalez being traded to the Twins after he was excellent before that. That's brought back some stuff to their farm system. We spoke about that earlier, and with the first round pick coming through, they will be looking to improve this coming draft in 2044. But what do you make of their farm?
They look to have some talent coming up in the next season or two. They got Greg McGarry, they got Rodolfo Hurtado,
Mm-hmm.
and they also have a third baseman by the name of Kamani Herbert, who all look to be primed to start next season.
Yeah, so perhaps some hope on the some hope going forward. I think obviously the headline prospect of this farm system is Randy Newkirk.
Oh, absolutely.
He was a
Yeah,
5th overall pick in the 43 draft, and I think it's safe to say if he's able to hit his potential, will be an enormous player for the team.
yes, 70 contact, 60 gap power, 65 power. He also has an incredible eye, and it looks like he's going to be a very good defender as well.
And with a high work ethic and intelligence, I think there's a good chance he makes that. Now, the only concern here is there was no development really to be seen since his drafting, but he hasn't had long. He's only played 54 games, and he played pretty well in junior rookie with 145 WRC plus. And I look forward to seeing what he's able to achieve next year.
Yes, it's going to be he's going to be definitely one of the prospects to look forward to in the next 5 years.
Yes. And on the pitching side, you've got Clarkson, who looks pretty good going forward. I think he's got a little bit more developing to do, but I think his general ratings are perhaps better than his overall would suggest.
I would agree. He has 3 excellent pitches that are fully developed, and he has excellent control.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases of where you might want to look a bit further than the overall rating.
I would agree.
Now, do you have anything else you want to mention about the Tigers?
No, there's no. I think we're good on the Tigers.
Yeah, I think so. All right. So, looking at the Baltimore Orioles, I think we've got a team that's found new hope with this season.
Yes, they're definitely rebounding from a couple of years rebuilding.
I think progress is the name of the game. We've got emerging pieces and financial flexibility, and I think they're all good omens.
Yes,
They made some trades in the off season.
yes. Prior to the 2043 season, the Baltimore Orioles traded their relief pitcher Steve Campos to the Minnesota Trades for a second-round pick that later became Nate Kapler and relief pitcher Nunzio Mioli.
And how would you say that worked out?
I would say that probably worked in the Baltimore Orioles' favor as of right now. And we can discuss that trade a little bit more because Steve Campos ended up being traded again.
So, Steve, do you want to look at which was the blockbuster Campos trade that came afterwards?
That was the Tim Wall trade. And what is really funny about that is both Campos and Wall did not perform well in Minnesota, but they both performed well in Vancouver.
Something, maybe they're just not a fan of jeans.
Yeah.
For newer GMs, there is a running joke in this league surrounding the Minnesota Twins and jeans. Do you want to talk about the story?
I was not a part of the online league RLB at the time, but they had a GM who was there forever who didn't talk much, but one time I believe he just responded with a emoji and it was jeans, and that just became a running joke within the league, and it's carried over to other leagues. Like David took it over to the stats only league where he named his team the Minnesota Jeans, and it's carried over to PBC because many of us are in RLB as well.
Indeed. And I think looking at this trade again, I think the Orioles got the last laugh here. They are looking to rebuild. He wasn't the piece they needed, and got a good return on him.
Yes, Kapler is a top 400 prospect,
Mhm.
and he looks like he's going to have a bit of power, a bit of contact, and an average eye. He's got some speed, and he's got that range in the outfield.
Indeed. I think Mioli is probably going to be a forgettable part of this trade. Um, his stuff could potentially be excellent, 85 potential, but he's 26, bordering 27, 30 control. I think it's probably over for his career.
Yes, he was let go. He's a free agent right now.
So not even good enough for the Orioles to offer him a contract.
No.
The other trade we had was one that I was part of. I traded for Ernesto Gallegos, who was one of their starters. He's had, I think you could say, a disappointing disappointing career. He's always showed potential. His FIP has often been quite good, but he's not always delivered. He's often had some pretty bad years, and I think it's safe to say that he had one of those bad years in 2043.
Absolutely. He was at one time a top 100 prospect. He does. I mean, he's not a go-to for an ace, but he's definitely a serviceable candidate for like a fourth or fifth role on a team.
And I think that the haul they got back from me has turned out quite strong.
I think Sean Hensley is going to be the big piece.
And almost in a reversal of Gallegos, Sean Hensley was a very low-ranked prospect at the time.
Yes,
I
he's
believe he was. Where was he? No, go
he's
ahead.
ranked 430 right now.
Right. Is that overall?
That's overall of the top
Yeah.
500.
So when he was traded to the Orioles, this guy was about the 68th prospect in my system. Um, and I think that was obviously uh, far poorer than he has turned out to be. He has developed a little bit over this season, um, but I think he is going to be a very good player for them going forward. Um, he's generally good across the board, um, good at everything. He's going to be a great corner outfielder. Doesn't quite have the range for centre, but he's going to be a perfectly serviceable player for them. And if that talent boost rating comes into play, well, he's in a perfect position to receive it.
I agree. That's a good pickup by the Orioles.
Um, I think Jamie Parker, you could say, has been
he could make a career as a bench player.
Yeah, he has a lot of utility potential, 60 potential rating at shortstop, and 70 at centre field, and all of the other positions. So he can he'll play the field, and with that eye of 70, um, with that potential that is, and high speed, he perfectly fits into that role, and will be able to get on base occasionally with that.
And Duncan is another one who may find a role as a backup, like a bench player as well. He has that range in the outfield, and he has a cannon for an arm. He has speed. He could be a incredible pinch runner.
Indeed, but I think he would definitely have to improve with the bat if he's going to, really have any
Yeah,
priority on rosters.
yeah,
Um,
he is
I think
pretty much below average in everywhere except for gap power.
indeed, which I mean, it's nice with the speed, but I think you're probably going to see him bounce between teams if he reaches that potential, and you're probably going to see him wind up on mostly lower rated teams. So I think that's all of the trades that the Orioles made. Um, Looking at their team, I think Gumlaw, we have to mention, Rookie of the
Yes,
Year, 6.6 WAR, um, outstanding debut, and I think clearly going to be a centerpiece of that franchise.
yes, 39 home runs, 122 RBIs, an OPS plus of 155. Just an incredible debut.
And I think I wouldn't say he exceeded expectations. He's been, highly rated for a long time, um, but I don't think anyone saw him performing quite that well.
Well, he was a first round pick by the Astros in 2040. And prior to the 2043 season, he was ranked number 38 in the OSA.
Indeed, and I think he came from the Astros in exchange for Chad Young, amongst a few others.
Yes,
And I think with Chad Young, we'll look at him a bit later. I think it's safe to say that that trade's looking quite favourable for the Orioles now.
yes, it is.
Um,
But boy, I bet the Astros wish they had him
oh
still.
yes, yeah, we'll touch on them later, but they could definitely use him. Now, I think in the hitting core for the Orioles this year, it's been, aside from Gumlaw, it's been pretty disappointing. There's been no real standouts as far as I can see, and I think if Gumlaw is going to be able to make things happen there, they'll need to surround him with a bit more of a sporting cast.
They do have some decent younger players that are surrounding Gumlo, like in Eric Zalakar and Kevin JaVale.
But I think in terms of the actual results of this season, they're not going to they're not going to stand out at all. They'll need others to be able to make things happen on the offense. Otherwise, runs are going to be very hard to come by.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest problems was their pitching.
Mm. Now, now, pitching wise, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
They didn't. They had only one player on their pitching staff who had a positive winning percentage, and he wasn't even that good. Uh, 568 ERA, 486 FIP, negative point 0.4 WAR.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think his performance probably didn't correlate that. Not to, didn't cause those results. I think it was more a case of correlation than causation. I think there were some performances that maybe the win-loss columns don't give justice to, with Byler, 3.53 ERA, very respectable. Dan Weeks, despite only a 45 overall, he had a 3.78 ERA, and so I think these two were some standouts from the pitching staff. But it would be questionable as whether they can replicate that going forward.
Yes, and you also have Jake Flack, who has some incredible stuff. 85 stuff. He has an 85 fastball, 75 slider. Doesn't quite have the movement and the control, but he's got that stuff.
And 100 miles an hour at maximum as a sidearm pitcher.
Yes.
The other guy in the pen that I think is worth mentioning is Wes Brewer. He pitched 51.2 innings over 58 games with a 245 ERA plus, 1.74 ERA, and a FIP of 3.20. So I think it's safe to say maybe this isn't sustainable, but it was an excellent year.
Yes, but I believe Wes Brewer should probably be in the rotation.
Yeah, he's got 4 very good pitches.
Yes, and once that stuff develops, he's going to have 105 stuff.
Obviously, a little bit less with moving from the pen, but do you think that will develop? He's 26 now.
I think he'll be a serviceable number 3 guy, number 2 guy for the Orioles. They still need an ace.
But definitely someone maybe we can look out for starting on the mound rather than coming out of the pen next year.
Right.
I think defensively they were quite strong. You've got Gumlaw and Vega were holding it down the outfield well. Canada at short. And then, I mean, there were issues. Buehler was absolutely horrific at second. But fortunately, only a limited role, which in many ways makes it even more impressive as to quite how poorly he was able to perform. Let me find the stats for that.
Yes, in 55 games, he had a negative 8.8 zone rating.
Which is, I mean, that is an impressive thing to be able to achieve. Now, I think when we start looking at their farm, we see, some good prospects going forward.
Yes, we do. We obviously their first baseman, Arturo Valdivieso. I'm sure I said that wrong.
Excellent contact, excellent power. He's quite raw for his age, but a high ceiling and a strong profile.
And they look to have a second baseman by the name of Juan Trujillo, who could obviously replace Belula in 2044.
And this guy's, I think, OSA has him with a potential of 70.
Yes.
With a good eye, good avoid Ks. And while his power and contact will need to improve, he gives himself a great chance with that eye and avoid Ks rating.
They also have this incredibly defensive shortstop who could be making a debut next season as well with Josh Horning.
Josh Horning. Yeah, 80 range, 70 error, 70 arm, 75 double play, 80 defensive rating on shortstop. That is definitely someone to watch out for. And I think Trujillo or Trujillo, I can never pronounce these names, will potentially be someone we see going into next year as well.
Yes.
And I think just in general, you scroll down and you're looking even at their number 24 prospect in Sean Hensley. They have quite a deep farm here. 26 prospects in the top 500, and even green potentials going down as far as
Number 39,
39 with Loic
Loki
Bonino,
Loke Sonino.
the guy from, is that Venezuela or Colombia? Venezuela.
Yes.
He is going to be a stealing monster with 75 speed and 70 gap power, triples all the way. Is there anything else you'd like to mention on the Orioles?
They have a first baseman who has an incredible eye and a lot of power, low contact, low gap power, and may not be that defensively good and low speed, but his name is Jared Porzel. He probably could be making a debut sometime next year.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting prospect. And at 25, he's on the brink of really needing to show that major league promise and finally get that debut.
Yes.
I think the last thing I want to mention with the Orioles is that Greg should get a lot of credit for the way he's built this team up. This team was not in a good spot and is
Oh,
now really showing some signs of a promising future.
yes. The team that he took over was kind of hurting financially.
And I think it's
And
safe to say it's been a long, painful rebuild.
yes, they haven't been to the playoffs in 4 seasons. 2040 was their last playoff appearance, and that was with their old GM Forrest.
So we'll look forward to seeing what the Orioles can bring in 2044. Okay, so moving on to the Boston Red Sox. I think a very disappointing season for them. I think
Yes,
they seem headed back to another rebuild.
it seems that way. They just made the playoffs for the first time. They lost in the ALCS,
mm,
and they're just on the skids again.
yeah, and that was after another quite a few years of
Lengthy
pain with
rebuild.
the rebuild. So I think, yeah, it was difficult for the Red Sox because a lot of players that on paper looked very good seemed to underperform this year.
Yes,
And we'll look at some of those in a moment, but I think first we'll just look at they had one trade this offseason.
yes,
They
and
were
that was a trade with Seattle.
indeed one of my trades, and this was me looking for a lefty starting pitcher prospect for the next year. I had guys at third base that I wanted to play, and I thought, let's trade Joe Calder. I don't want him at first. I don't want him on the bench. He's a guy I can potentially move and get someone back that can be impactful in the future. But how would you say this turned out for the Red Sox?
They did get Calder did have some power in his bat, and he's a solid defender who led the AL in total chances, assists, and innings played as a third baseman. But I do think that you ended up winning that trade with Chris Wilds.
I think
I mean, he hasn't played yet for you, I believe.
he made a few appearances at the end of the season, including I think one or two starts. But yeah, he did spend most of the year in AAA.
I mean, he's a
Where
top 100 prospect. He has
he
great
is.
stuff, great movement, great control. He has an excellent fastball, a great slider, but he's still trying to develop that changeup.
Hmm, maybe a guy for the third or fourth starter in the rotation in the future.
Yes,
Um, and I think if we look at the other things in that trade, we had a third round pick, which
yes, and that became Kevin Haynes.
Kevin Haynes. Let me see. Kevin Haynes. Kevin Haynes, the centre fielder, rather than the starting pitcher, who was the ace of their staff for that year. And I think he's shown out to be. He's still 17. There's a lot of time left for him, but I think at the moment he just profiles as a below-average centre fielder, defensively
Oh,
and offensively.
oh, he has the same name as your pitcher.
He does. So
Yeah, he's
there is the irony that Boston traded for Kevin Haynes last season, and now I traded back for Kevin Haynes, but they're two completely different players.
Yeah. If Haynes was to develop, he will be a great fielder and he'll have some speed, but he just doesn't have that bat. He doesn't have the discipline behind the plate. He's going to strike out quite a bit. I mean, like you said, he's 17 years old, but he has some upside.
Yeah. And this was the guy that, sorry, I didn't trade him to them. They picked him up with their draft pick
Yeah.
in the third round pick that we traded them. Yeah, sorry about that. Now, moving on to how the team performed, um, looking a bit more, I think it's a good summary would be to say that long ball was not enough. I think when you look at their team statistics, if I remember correctly, they were the 6th overall team in the American League um, with 4 home runs.
They
No,
had
tied for 4th.
100. They're tied for fourth at 196 home runs this season,
I think,
and
no, go ahead.
and they had at least 3 players hit 30 or more home runs.
And that's 7th overall in the AL League for extra base hits. But I think the big caveat here is it came with strikeouts. 1,320 strikeouts, 6th in the AL. And I think it's safe to say, and I think that the GM himself would tell you it was an overcorrection from last year where they just didn't hit enough home runs.
Yes, I believe that was one of the reasons you were able to move Calder.
I think showing the value of targeting the guys that you sell to as to what they are looking for or what they have been concerned about.
I mean, Calder did do okay behind the plate, 26 home runs, 59 RBIs. Uh, just,
Not enough.
he wasn't
I mean,
creating too many runs.
no, a home run's worth only 1 run if you've got no one else on base. And I think that was the way the season went for them. Um, some moments that the fans could celebrate with the home runs, but not enough results um, to justify it.
They
Um,
definitely have one of the best parks for home runs.
I think Arredondo was the one real standout here. A right-handed first baseman with power hitting over that monster. Um, he hit for 139 WRC plus with 33 home runs. Hit over 300 with 304 average. Um, this was a good performance for a guy who's still very young at 24.
Yes, and this is his first full season in the majors.
Indeed, he's had 2 previous seasons. I just wonder why he missed. So 2042, it would appear the reason he didn't play for the full season was because of a torn thumb ligament. And I think 2041 was his first season in the majors. So he was only brought up mid-season. So nice for him to be able to play a full season and to have that sort of result.
Yes. And another former first round draft pick.
Now, I think we have to talk about some of their more disappointing players. Kevin Winkler, you're looking at a guy who's a first round draft pick, 70 home run power, and yet only 23 home runs. Yes, he is a left hand hitter. hitting into that enormous right field in Boston. So, those fly balls are going to get caught more than at some parks. But at the same time, he only played at Fenway for half the season. And I don't think that's a big enough excuse for what you can only really call a failure of a season with 89 WRC plus.
And his rookie season, he ended up hitting 37 home runs the year that Boston made the playoffs.
Indeed. And it's only been declined since there, which hasn't
Yes,
been reflected scouting-wise. But I think we may see an adjustment in that or a bounce back year.
it's definitely got that potential. That 70 power as a left-handed bat would look really good in Yankee Stadium.
It would. I'm sure Horacio would salivate at the prospect of this, but Yankees Red Sox trades, not sure they're going to happen. On the pitching side of things, Rob Blair was a nice, would you say surprise?
Rob Blair?
Rob Blair, yeah, he's a free agent coming into the season. I think Boston declined his arbitration, non-tendered him. But this is a guy with 5 good pitches. There's nothing truly elite, but there's a good fastball, a good forkball, a good changeup, decent cutter, a decent slider, and with 55 stuff, 50 movement, 60 control. I'm not sure 50 overall really is accurate here. And with that ERA plus of 106 and a FIP minus of 79, he had a very good season. The concern that one might have here is the latter half of his season. He played so well, in fact, in the first half, he became an all-star. He was going with an ERA plus of 309 in April, 151 in May, and 138 in June. But after that, aside from one game in October, his ERA was sky high, 5.85 and 6.11, 6.15. So this is a guy that had a very Jekyll and Hyde performance this year.
Yes, his overall and his overall doesn't seem to reflect his actual production.
And interestingly enough, during his rookie year, he actually had a potential of 60.
Some of his stuff has declined since his rookie season.
And that would explain some of the slight regression from his first season. But still, we'll be interested to see where he goes in the. We'll be interested to see where he goes in the free agency. Another good pitcher on that team was Ziemba. I think someone that you could say still hasn't reached his peak yet, but put a good basis for going forward. He only had 2.5 good pitches coming into this season. With
His slider is still
curve.
developing.
Slider's still developing, but at 25, he's getting, there's a little bit of a concern maybe on the development speed there, and he is fragile. But I think as a good 101 velo, that's always going to provide some backup for him. And his stuff, movement, and control, while he's still got room to move on the stuff and movement, it's all currently at 50, which gives him a solid base, even if he doesn't develop too much from here. And I think if that slider never develops, he may have a future as a relatively elite bullpen guy.
I totally agree with that.
Ace-wise, Kevin Haynes, do you want to talk a little bit about him? I'm probably a little bit biased with him now, having traded for him in the off-season, but he had a bad year.
Yes, Kevin Haynes is probably one of the most complete pitchers in the league. He's got great stuff, great control. He's got about average movement, but he has 4 excellent pitches. He can go to any one of those pitches to get you out. He has a
Yeah, go ahead.
he has a curveball, a changeup, a splitter, and a cutter that are all 70 overall, and he can use any one of those to get you out with that 70 stuff.
Indeed, and I think normally for the last two seasons before this, we've seen 3.05, 3.26 ERA. So it was quite a shock to see 4.24 coming out of the bag this year. And I think this, will concern some. Personally, I'm not too concerned. I see a FIP that is in line with the way he pitched last year, where he pitched substantially better. I'm seeing a slight change in his overall, but when I look at what the real difference is, he's only really hit 70 once before, a couple of times before, in 42 and at one point in 43, and that dropped from 65 to 60. I can't see where it's coming from on his actual pitch rating, on his actual ratings. So I think he could be due a bounce back year. I'm certainly bargaining on it with the amount that I'm paying him next year.
Well, one of the hampers of his season last season was that he didn't get enough run support from his team. He only had 2.6 runs per game,
Indeed.
and that is the second or the third lowest in his career.
Indeed. And this is also a very hitter-friendly park that he's playing into. He's a right-handed pitcher pitching into right-handed hitters who are going to be trying to go over that monster, and that's just not going to be fun for him. So I think coming to the Mariners ballpark, which is far more pitcher-friendly, we could definitely be seeing a bounce back here. Now, moving on to the other pitchers on that team. I think pitchers, let me just check. You had Burns as a starter. He was disappointing. 5.09 ERA. 3 good pitches, but that's not going to be enough to keep him performing at the major league level if he is going to perform like that. This is 2 years in a row that he's been poor in Boston, and I think maybe time for a change of scenery there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's got an excellent cutter, and he's got great stamina. He can be an innings eater.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he did win 17 games in 2041 and had a 4.4 WAR.
Yeah. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see where that goes and whether Boston chooses to trade him this offseason. Another guy, I think the 5th starter they had here was Josh Fontenot, who's now a free agent. And my bad, not a starter,
He
a
was a
relief
reliever.
pitcher.
Yeah,
He
he
had
pitched in more
96
games than
games.
any other. Yep, more games than anybody else in the league last season. He was a
And
former relief pitcher for me years ago.
he had a great fit for the season, 3.79, but that didn't translate into results with a 5.20 ERA. Quite different from the 3.10 and 2.76 in previous years. And I can see why Boston let him go to free agency.
Yeah, his R WAR was negative 1.2.
Yeah, it's sad to see a player decline like that. Their bullpen, definitely a strong point. I think they had the second
Second best.
ranking ERA wise, and it will be interesting to see what happens to them. Rebuilding teams often tend to trade away that bullpen, and so that could definitely be somewhere where the vultures begin to gather. Is there anyone from that bullpen you want to pick out?
I would say Juan Palma.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has an excellent slider. a really good fastball as well, and he did okay last season coming out of the bullpen in 65 games. He had a 1.16 WHIP, a 134 ERA plus, 323 ERA for the season.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he's
I
definitely
think.
somebody that could be on the move.
Yeah, and I think definitely outperforming those overall ratings at 45.
Yes.
Um, Another guy that performed very well in that bullpen was Delgado, despite a 40 overall, a 1.53 ERA plus, and you've also got uh, Joe Carlson, another 40 overall, 172 ERA plus, and Bobby Idol, 145 ERA plus with 40 overall. So I don't know what Boston is cooking with 40 overall relievers, but it seems to work.
Yes.
Um, Defensively, I'd say they were average. Some good performance with Cooper, but some holes with Winkler. Winkler's defensive performance not great, which makes his disappointing season with the bat even worse. Um, but I think there were bigger issues there than the defense in the field. Um,
I agree. Uh, Winkler and their center fielder Yamamoto and Calder wasn't very good this season. Not in zone rating, even though he did lead the all third basemen in total chances, efficiency, and innings played. Was it efficiency or I think it was something else? I apologize.
yeah, so it's definitely something that they will be looking to improve, or if they tear things down, something that they would be happy not to worry about going forward.
Yes, Josh Cooper is getting older.
Yep, maybe a case of trading him away to someone who can get one last good season out of him while he's still serviceable.
Yes, $29.5 million for 2044.
Yeah, that probably needs some retention. Either that or just rolling with him for that last year. Um, I think going to their farm system is looking better. I know some of this is some of the pieces they received back from the Haynes trade, um, notably Miranda and a couple of others. I think they also received a first round pick with that trade, so there's more coming. Um, the big guys that I notice in this farm is Yves Brun. Yves Brun is another very good starter. Um, he will be reliant on that slider developing to avoid becoming a bullpen piece, but he's getting closer to the major leagues now. He had some good development, some big hits for his development in April, May, August, and then a bit more in December. And I look forward to seeing him in the league and what he has to offer.
Yes, I believe that they Yasubio Sotero will be making a debut in 2043 in center field,
Yep,
and so will Joe Bredman. But
right.
the real stars of their minor league system is Juan Ramos and Luis Garabay.
Luis Garabay indeed. And I think this is a top shortstop. Um, 55 defense at shortstop and only a 45 arm. I think he might be swapping to second base. What do you think?
Yeah, I would probably move him to second base. I think he does have I believe the minimum infield range for a shortstop should be 65, but you want to shoot for something 70 or higher.
Yeah, I think with that arm, you're going to be looking
Yeah,
at
yeah,
some
the
rather
arm.
noodly throws.
Yeah, and his turn double play is a little low too.
Hmm. But with that arm, he's never going to fit at third. So I think he may have to
second
stick
base.
at second. And I mean, he was quite slow this season with his development. He had only a couple of overall rating and potential rating improvements, and nothing really to his attributes. And getting closer to 24, he's beginning to look a little bit underdeveloped for his age.
Well, when he was drafted fifth round in 2039, he was only a 40 potential guy.
Yeah, so one of those real
Boosters.
emerging talents, a booster, and hopefully he can live up to that. But it may be one of those guys where we hype him up during his prospect days, but he comes back down to that overall that he was expected to be at.
He could be making a debut sometime next season. But
True.
I want to imagine that he will be on the opening day roster.
Maybe a June or September call-up, manipulating that service time a little bit. But yeah, in general, some strong pieces. We did mention Ramos, a top centre fielder with good power and eye, excellent speed, excellent stealing, excellent base running. He'll likely stick at centre. He's struggling in the minor leagues with his performance, but he has been getting some good development. He's now at 25 overall, but most importantly, had his power and contact and eye increase this year, and will look to continue to develop as the number 2 prospect on this team.
And he was another guy who was drafted at 40 overall.
So a lot of late bloomers here on this team.
He wasn't drafted. He was a scouting discovery. I apologize.
Discovery. Well, it seems the scout knew better than we did.
Yes.
I think that's everything for the Bruins, the Red Sox. Speaking of teams that seem to get players out of nowhere, the Bruins definitely one of those. So maybe it's a Boston thing.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so looking at the Royals, the last team in the AL East that we haven't looked at yet. And I think this is a pretty horrifying season for them. Absolutely abject hitting core. I don't think they're any closer to the playoffs for this season. And I think the bright spot for Kansas wasn't a player they've acquired or developed, but a GM that they've acquired in Katie, who is a good GM we know from RLB and has a history of rebuilding teams.
Yes. She's also an HRB and has won several World Series with the New York Giants.
So I think definitely some hope for them there. There are a few trades. There are a few trades that they made with the AI. Katie only came in the off season after the season, so all of this will be AI trades, mostly with the Braves and the Grizzlies, and Detroit, all teams who didn't have a GM at the time, as we can't make trades with the AI. All of these trades were pretty much nothing. Mostly just smaller, relatively irrelevant pieces being shuffled around, so we're not going to really look at them. But I thought it was worth mentioning they exist. And I think let's get into just how bad that hitting core was. So Joseph,
yes.
what would you say was the biggest issue they had with that hitting core?
Well, obviously they didn't have anybody who could get on base.
Yeah.
Their best player hit 190. Joe Crowder, and he had 41 home runs and 101 RBIs, which is really good. But he also had 223 strikeouts.
Indeed, and that contributes to them having the 4th worst strikeout rate in the league. And I think the sad part is when they got on base, they were good. They had the best base running in the entire American League with plus 13.3, but just wasn't there. And I mean, it shows how bad their ability to get hits was, with the fact that they actually had the 5th best bases on ball rate in the league. So I think the contact really was truly abject.
And they had their combined WAR for their batting was only 6.3. With
And almost all of that was Crowther,
Joe Crowder
Parker,
locked in, and
and
LeBrec.
Lebrec. Lebrec and Pinkston, another guy, the Jamie Pinkston, the not quite debutant. He did have a season in 2042, but had a partial season this year. Was in AAA for some of it. He had a good season, 125 WRC plus. Obviously, a smaller sample size, and 50 overall in potential. So we'll see how that pans out. But Lebrec has gone to free agency. He's 36. So while a positive for the season, I think his contribution was rather wasted.
Yes.
And obviously a very small sample size with only 43 games.
Was he injured for most of 43?
Let me see
No,
what happened.
no, he wasn't.
No injuries, just didn't play. And that is why
Well, he
human
didn't.
GMs will always be better than AI.
Well, he didn't sign a minor league contract until August, so that might be why he only played 40-some games.
That would explain. So a guy that maybe more of us should have been looking at to add to our teams.
Yes.
And that would explain why they didn't want to re-sign him. Now, on the pitching side of things, I think there is a bit more hope. You've
Yes.
got Steve Smoke, who is obviously an excellent pitcher. That's 75 potential. He is looking like a future ace. And while he, wasn't an outstanding season from him, it's a good basis to build off.
Yes, and they also had Mike Stewart, who now he's still progressing. He's got that 70 potential.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah,
I think was Mike Stewart traded though? Am I misremembering that?
no, he was traded, but not in the
Not in the season.
2043.
Yeah, so Mike Stewart is no longer there, but they have got a good haul back for him. We'll look at that in a future episode. But Mike Stewart, though, didn't have a great season. 5.67 ERA. I mean, a FIP of 4.30. I don't think that he delivered on what would have been expected for him this year.
No, he definitely had career highs in just about every category.
You mean career
Earned
lows?
runs,
In terms of
ERA.
career highs, in terms of performing poorly.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
And I think he was joined in his poor performance by Hayes. I think he stunk as well. 55, 55 movement, 55 control, 65 stuff, an 80 ranked fastball, and a good slider and elite curveball. This guy should not be having a 5.58 ERA season. And I think that's definitely a worry for the Royals and for Katie coming in, that some of these guys, their trade value is definitely diminished because of their poor performance this year.
that is true. Eric did an excellent job building that team up after their scandal. They had 3 seasons of winning 80, 85 games or more, and they just made their first playoffs in 2041.
And
I mean, Eric has left to go become GM of the Arizona Diamondbacks, which is what led to their collapse. As
yes,
we did have one GM come in named Tommy, but he was pretty infrequent with the team.
And
Uh,
I think
I
you
think
can see,
Katie's going to do an extra job.
yeah, I think you can see the effect that Eric had on that team by the effect he's now had on the Diamondbacks, who had an excellent season, which we will talk
Yes.
about in the next another part of this. I think we are going to, with how long this is taking, we are probably going to do 4 parts. Um, we'll see how quickly we can get those released. Um, then the pick of the rotation for me, I think, though, was Whitehead, Dan Whitehead. He had a good year. 3.77 ERA. The FIP maybe suggests he was a bit fortunate, but I think just in general a good year with good K percentage, keeping the balls on base down and keeping those home runs down.
Yes, and he also was quite the innings eater. 200 innings pitched.
200 innings. And that is something we should mention about Hayes. He did eat almost 190 innings. So while he performed poorly, he isn't quite deserving of just complete criticism. There are benefits there. I think they definitely weren't helped pitching wise by the defense. You had Crowter, who, while he was an offensive monster with the bat, hitting lots of home runs with 41 home runs. Defensively, this guy was in centre field for most of the season with a minus 6.0 zone rating. And I'm not sure with a 50 defence in centre field whether that's where he belongs. I think maybe he's better suited in right field, where he had a better performance in general with 2.8 zone rating in 37 games. The other problem, shortstop. We had Blockton, did not have a good year. This guy is not a shortstop. 45 defense rating at short, only 55 range and 35 speed. This guy had a minus 12.3 zone rating, and I think realistically we need to see him going back to third for him
Yes.
to be able to make a difference on the team.
I don't know what it is with AI putting really bad shortstops in.
And I think having big defensive holes at 2 key positions definitely didn't help them. I think if we move on to looking at their future a bit more with their prospects, their farm is looking okay. Kurt Hamilton is the big guy, second overall pick in the 2043 draft, 75 potential and already up to 30 overall. He's had a strong first season, and while he's lost a little bit of the potential, he was an 80 potential at draft. His overall is beginning to kick up, and a good first season in junior ball could lead to him. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if he played full season ball in 2044.
I think he may be a little further away than 2044.
No, I mean if he played full season ball, as in going to A-ball.
Oh, fall season.
Yeah.
Okay, full season.
I definitely don't think he's ready for the major league yet. Some time for that.
My mistake. But I do believe that Jorge Villegas and Steve Clark could be seeing their debuts in 2043.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But Steve Clark is not a center fielder.
No, and I think while the AI might try and put him there, we'll be fortunate enough that Katie will not do the same.
Right.
He is quite young, and so we'll have to see. With a fragile rating, hopefully injuries aren't too impactful on his career, and we'll have to see how that affects his speed going forward, and whether Katie risks him stealing with that 75 stealing, 75 speed, because he can get a lot of stolen bases, but also there's a higher chance he gets hurt.
He had 33 stolen bases in Omaha last season.
Indeed, and that's despite missing 2 to 3 weeks with a
Yeah.
rotator cuff strain. So we'll see how that goes. Now, other guys I wanted to mention was Cluck. Um, he is a human, not a chicken. I have had that verified. Um, and I think it may be getting a bit concerning with his development. He's struggled again in junior rookie, and there are very few signs of progress. I think that's definitely uh, a pitcher who might be looking at we might be looking at a bust here.
Yes. He is kind of he's kind of plateauing. He hasn't really improved at all.
Is
And I think OSA is going to the scouting report's going to reflect that soon.
Yeah, I think once you hit sort of the middle of your 28, you're 20 years old, you're getting towards 21, and you still haven't got a single one of your stuff movement or control above 30. You're looking at someone who's just far too raw at this stage, and I suspect we'll see him. He may well still pan out, but if he does, I think you're looking at more of a sort of 45, 50 overall guy than a 60,
Right.
and probably not justifying that first round pick.
Yes, that's a pretty well, I wouldn't say that was a pretty bad pick because at the time he was drafted, it looks like he was 60 potential.
Yeah, and he still is currently, but we'll have to see where that goes. And I think he's improved since he was drafted. Um, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. Um, he's obviously already had a boost. Um, before he was drafted, he was
Yeah.
originally a 2020 guy, which is quite extraordinary. Um, but I think we'll have to see his overall start to match his potential, or that potential is going to start coming down again. Um, I think all in all, another aimless season for Kansas. Uh, the core is going to have to start forming, um, because otherwise we're going to see Hamilton sort of left on his own a little bit. There's a few other guys that are interesting, as we've mentioned a couple of them, Steve Clark being one of them, but it may be a case of uh, adding some pieces to come up behind them, and then doing a few trades with some of these top prospects that are coming through sooner than later. Or you could see a bit of an ignominious end for their cost-controlled seasons. Anything
We'll,
else you want to mention with Kansas?
uh, I do know that Kansas City did make a pretty good trade in their favor, but we'll talk about that in a later podcast.
Yes, I think definitely there are a lot of trades going on with Kansas coming up, and I look forward to talking about them. But I think summing up I think we've got to the end of the AL East.
Yes.
Summing up uh, the league, how would you say that uh, the league performed compared to other leagues this year?
I think the AL East is probably one of the weaker divisions in PBC at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's very top heavy.
Yes, yes, you got the Yankees, the Voodoo, and then you got pretty much the Blue Jays, and then you got everybody else.
Yeah, you got Yankees, Voodoo, a big gap, uh, the Blue Jays, another gap, Expos, another gap, and then Tigers and Orioles, and Red Sox and Royals, and there's no truly awful teams in this division, but I wouldn't say that there are many great teams in this division.
Right, and who knows what the Yankees or the Voodoo will be in 2044.
Indeed. I think this could definitely be a division that we see some
change in
low,
vision. I
yeah,
don't.
yeah, and some maybe some low ranked, some low win teams maybe making some rather shocking runs in playoffs. I think this is, if there's ever a division that we could see a team win, 85 games or 84 games, and then go on a hot streak in playoffs, this is the division they're going to come from.
Right.
I think that sums up the AL East. I think this will also sum up this episode with how long this has gone on for. We will, well, this part, I should say, not episode. We will look at releasing part 2 at some point very shortly, and then we'll also be looking at the NL as well. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.